Hello, everyone, and welcome. Are there any materials? Yes, we will have slides and we will send them out to you um, after the presentation today. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Unlocking Legal Resources, a pro se litigant's guide to effective research. Thank you all so much for being here today. My name is Rianne from the San Diego Law Library, and we are honored to have Jeffrey Peters as our speaker today. So before we get started, I would like to go over a few bits of housekeeping. First thing, this is not an MCLE presentation, and there will not be a certificate of completion for this class. Again, this is not an MCLE. This is, however, an interactive session, and you can feel free to ask questions by using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And under the Q&A function, you may ask questions with your name or anonymously, whichever you are more comfortable with. So we do hope to get to most of the questions by the end of the presentation. Also, please do not ask any personally identifying questions or any specific questions about your case. Please only ask general questions. And the slides of this presentation will be emailed to you after the class. And finally, at the end of the class, you will see a link for a survey. So if you can, please just take a moment, fill it out, and we would greatly appreciate your feedback. All right, well, that's all I have, and I'll turn things over to Jeffrey.
Thank you, Rianne.
Thank you.
All right, as Rianne mentioned, my name is Jeff Peters. I'm a licensed attorney based in Houston, Texas. And prior to joining Lexis, I was a solo practitioner for a little over 4 years, specializing in small business formation, contract drafting and review, as well as some estate planning. For today's objective, we'll look at ways that we can understand the content that's available in the patron terminal and the San Diego Law Library. And so in doing that, we're first going to sort of define the difference between primary and secondary sources. And again, we'll look into Lexis in terms of where those sources are located. After that, we're going to take a look at approaches to crafting a research method, be it a natural language search or a terms and connector search. We're going to look at different strategies of both approaches. And throughout this presentation, again, it'll be really interactive. As Rianne mentioned, if you have any questions, feel free to put it in the Q&A or the chat, and we'll go from there. All right, so when it comes to legal research, it goes without saying that understanding and applying the complex rules of authority is essential. And using authorities properly means recognizing their relative importances and strengths. As there are some authorities that must be applied, and there are others that you may have the discretion to apply, or at least argue that they should apply. And so some of these authorities serve as a much stronger support for your position than others. And so, primary authority is the law itself. It's created by a governmental body at both the state and federal level. So, for example, at the federal level, we have obviously Congress. Congress, let's say, for example, goes through the process of passing the Clean Air Act. That's becoming the controlling primary authority within that specific area of law. We also have regulatory issues or regulations. So the EPA, in this example, or other administrative agencies, which are organized under the executive branch, it goes through the process of creating regulation. And regulations can also be controlling primary authority. In some cases, they're used in terms of interpreting how a statute is implemented or interpreted or applied. With the regulations, again, when Congress passes a law, it doesn't contain a lot of details, right? So it's relying on oftentimes regulatory authorities to sort of within the jurisdiction of that statute to create regulations that create primary law. And as often the case when a dispute arises around a law or regulation and how that rule is applied, or how a term could be interpreted. Then we have also case law, and with the case law, that may also result in controlling primary authority. So, primary authority can be either mandatory or persuasive, depending on the issue and the jurisdiction in which it's applied. Mandatory authority is primary authority that is binding on the jurisdiction in which it was enacted or promulgated or decided. So, for example, if an authority is binding, the decision maker must follow it as it controls the situation or set of facts. On the flip side, if the primary authority was enacted outside of the jurisdiction in question, it's only persuasive authority. And so persuasive authority is authority that it can provide guidance, but it's not mandatory and does not control a set of facts. So, for example, a decision from the highest court in New York is not binding or mandatory on the state of California or Texas, for that matter. And this pyramid here simply demonstrates the different strengths or hierarchies of primary authority, where, of course, the Constitution sits at the top, followed by statutes, regulations, case law, and finally, common law. When people write about the law, they're writing secondary authority, and its main point is to explain the law. And some of the main issues or main uses, of secondary authority includes providing background information on a research topic, which can be very beneficial at the beginning of your research, just providing a better understanding of how your research sort of fits into a larger context. Another important reason of using secondary sources is that they can direct you to primary authorities. And lastly, in addition to helping you find primary authorities, secondary sources can themselves serve as persuasive authorities in very limited and certain situations, particularly when you're researching an issue of law in a jurisdiction in which the law is new or unsettled. However, you should be careful in the rare circumstances of using secondary sources as persuasive authority. Obviously, it makes no sense to cite a secondary source in support of an argument if you have controlling primary authority that is on point. And even if there is no controlling primary authorities on point, citing a case from another jurisdiction is often more persuasive than citing a secondary source, particularly if the foreign case is factually or on par with your particular case. And so, as I mentioned earlier, some examples of secondary authorities includes things like restatements, treatises or practice manuals, periodicals, and so on. And this chart here demonstrates the balance between the breadth of coverage of secondary source may cover, compared to how deep that source may dive into a particular subject. And so, as you can see, legal dictionaries, for example, as well as encyclopedias, they cover a wide collection of topics, but from a very high level. Conversely, treatises and law journals are very narrow in coverage, but tend to dive deeper into a specific topic or issue. Okay, so we're going to swap over to Lexis, and we're going to take a look at, how can you get to some of these secondary sources or some of these primary sources, during your legal research. Now, for today's demonstration, I actually be using Lexis Plus AI. I'm not going to go into the features of Lexis Plus AI. The patron terminals have access to Lexis Plus. So for the most part, when you log into Lexis, it'll look very much similar to what I have on the screen. The only difference is I have this protege assistant. It incorporates a generative component to my research. But there's a lot of extractive AI in Lexis Plus that you have access to through the patron terminals. So again, for the most part, everything will look pretty much the same, regardless of what terminal you're on in the library. So when it comes to accessing some of the state-specific content, be it primary or secondary, there are a couple of approaches you can take. Here in the search bar, again, very much like Google, you can type in keywords, you can do a natural language search, you can type in the name of a publication or the name of the case, and that'll take you directly to that source. Another approach is under the Explore tab. You can kind of explore based on different categories. So currently I'm under the state category. So for example, in California, I'll get a list here of, let me swap over here to make it brighter so we can see here. Swap over to the light view. So in California, I can see all the different databases that are associated with California. Here's a lot of my primary authority from some cases, some statutes and legislation, as well as some administrative codes. So maybe there's some AG opinions, some jury instructions, but also, some secondary materials. Again, these are some really great sources that I can kind of start my research in, picking up just better explanations of the law. I can pick up some keywords to improve my search, or even references to some other cases that I can leverage, as we'll do a little later on in the presentation. But again, these are some of the titles that are specific to California. I'll come back to the home page. So again, I'm in the light mode. That's why my page looks a little bit different. So I can explore by state or federal jurisdictions. I can explore by content, right? So if I want to dive right into my secondary materials, I can click on my secondary materials link, and then now this will contain all the different secondary materials, and categorize, regardless of a particular state or jurisdiction. Same thing. If I want to focus on a particular practice area, I can come down to practice area. And let's say, for example, I'm going to come down to family law. I know that's a really big topic in a lot of law libraries that I work with. Here I can search various databases that are specific to family law, statutes that are specific to family law, but also, just as important, a variety of different secondary sources that are relevant or specific to family law. And when it comes to a publication, if I have a question about a particular publication, let's say military family law, you may notice this little eye icon. I can click on it, and it'll bring me to this information page where I can see, who the publisher is, the coverage of that particular publication, how frequently that the publication is published, as well as a brief description of what is covered in that particular publication. And then kind of same thing in the search bar. As I start to type, Lexis may make some suggestions of, phrases, or maybe some particular documents, some sources. Here's some secondary sources relevant to my particular search. We'll go into one of the just going into a particular practice area. Again, we have our little eye icon here. And then we have our table of contents where we can kind of navigate to a particular issue that we may be looking for. Can expand this out, and again, just navigate into a chapter, or utilize the search bar and run a search, and it'll take us to the right page, or whatever the case may be. Okay, so going back to our home page, another resource that you have access to through the patron terminal, that's really similar to sort of secondary sources in terms of it being just a great resource to sort of launch your research, is practical guidance. When it comes to coverage, practical guidance, it covers these 26 practice areas and growing. And in other 26 practice areas, 9 titles are exclusive to Lexis. Moreover, the content within practical guidance is authored by over 1,700 attorneys from 99 of the 100 law firms. So to see what practical guidance looks like, swapping back into Lexis. Over here to the left, we have our experience doc. So currently we're in the legal research experience. And now I'm just going to go into practical guidance. And again, in practical guidance, I can throw in, do a search. I can throw in terms and connectors or topics that I may be looking for, and apply a few search filters. Here are those 26 odd practice areas. And so again, let's say, for example, with family law, I can click on family law. Maybe I want to draft a child custody and support document. So here I have some practice notes. I'll go into templates, and now I'll narrow to California. And so let's say I need to draft a custody agreement. I'll select custody agreement. And here, with the click of a button, I'm accessing automated templates. Basically, it's like a wizard that'll ask me a few questions, and based on those responses, it'll draft this particular document. In this example, a custody agreement for this specific to California. And this is something of what that document would look like. I can also copy and paste this document into Word as well. And, where the brackets are at, I can enter in that information. But again, it's just a launching pad where, similar to secondary sources, it's a great way that if you need actionable, maybe you're a pro se litigant, or excuse me, a pro se attorney, or even a pro se litigant, and you need to file some type of court document. It's just a great way that you can sort of more efficiently complete those tasks. And so this is what the document would look like. And again, in the brackets, you would if you're not using the automated templates, you just simply fill in the appropriate response. The documents may contain some drafting notes, so a little bit of information about a particular section, as well as some alternate clauses as well. So maybe for this paragraph 3 here, sort of an alternate clause, and there's a drafting note just to explain that alternate, or why you would use that alternate. And just going back into the home page for practical guidance. Again, there are things like practice videos. We talked a little bit about automated templates, resource kits. If I select that, there's just, again, a variety of resource kits, which are basically a curated collection of documents around these various topics. So there's things like checklists. There may be, again, some forms, cases, and things like that are relevant to these particular practice areas or topics, legal topics. And even, within the tools and resources, there's even things like presentations. If you need to do a presentation on something, you can select presentations. Or again, as I mentioned, there are some practice videos that you can view videos if that's the way you like to consume some of your legal content. Okay. So next, we're going to transition into understanding different research methods and effectively choosing the right research method. Whether you're doing a terms and connector search or a natural language search, it's important to have a research strategy. And so it goes without saying the complexity of the research, as well as the time constraints, will have a huge impact on your strategy. So, for example, it's a big difference between having to draft a memo or just getting a quick answer and drafting a motion. And so your strategy should be developed in two parts. Part one is assessing the problem, and the second part is actually, drafting the terms once you truly understand the problem or the question presented. So for part one, before you start your search, some of the things you'll want to consider includes things like, what is the area of law that is relevant to your research? Are you familiar with it, or do you need some background information, right, from some of those secondary sources, or maybe through practical guidance? Um, what does a client need? Is it a quick answer or a more thorough brief? What words, such as jargon, terms of art, would be useful based on a particular area of law, as well as the type of materials that you want to consult in coming up with these articles or coming up with these concepts or coming up with these keywords. And again, those are places where some of those secondary titles can be really beneficial in better understanding the problem and coming up with some key terms. And then the second part is in terms of drafting your search terms, you want to apply something similar to the TARC method. So you want to, again, kind of brainstorm some key terms or words that are essential to describe the facts or the problems or issues raised. You want to identify alternatives or synonyms to some of those key terms. Um, and then we're going to talk a little bit about root expanders and connectors. But if you're doing a natural language search, you may want to consider some of the expander commands to account for variant spellings of a particular keyword, as well as using connectors to show using connectors to find sort of similar keywords or terms. And oftentimes, as researchers, we find ourselves starting from square one, and all we have is a phrase or legal concept that we need to look into. And so, it's not uncommon for researchers to simply start their research using a natural language approach, simply searching using regular spoken language, much like we do when we're using Google. And, many legal research platforms today provide researchers with the ability to effectively Googleize their research, where, an algorithm sort of works behind the scenes to determine which words in your search prompt are maybe mandatory or optional to your search, again, based on various relevancy factors. And there are certainly benefits to natural language searching, particularly when you're unfamiliar with the topic or you're not exactly sure what you're looking for and you need to sort of more broadly examine what's out there. And then, the other approach is terms and connectors, also known as Boolean search. So it's a method researchers tend to use when they're more comfortable with the topic and want to retrieve a specific set of results. It gives you a bit more control in the results. But sometimes it can be a little bit unforgiving because if your prompt is just too narrow, you could potentially miss important documents. And just real quickly, I just want to highlight a few common connectors and commands. So we have some basic connectors, again, things like and that retrieves documents that contains the terms in that particular document, regardless of where they appear. The or connector retrieves documents containing any of the words that are listed under the or command, and not would eliminate documents that contain certain words. We have some proximity connectors to give better context to our search terms. So we may be looking for words within a few words of each other. Again, just to kind of bring a bit more context. And so it could be within words, or within a particular paragraph, or within a segment of a document. We also have some frequency connectors that allow us. It enables us to set a minimum number of times that a search word or phrase must appear within a specific document. And this helps us to retrieve only the most relevant documents that contain a more in-depth discussion about a particular topic, compared to a document that might mention a word once or twice, and that's pulled into your results list. And then here are some commands. Again, we have the root expander. It's used to find root words plus all the words made by adding letters to the end of it. So it can only be used at the end of our root word. There must be at least 3 characters prior to the exclamation mark, or you may receive unexpected results. The single character command is used to replace a single character in a word. And the multiple character command is used as a placeholder for words that begin and end with the same letters. And so it can be used at the end of the root word, similar to the root expander, or ideally in between words. So in our example, D star G would find combination of words beginning with D and ending with G. And just real quickly, when you're applying a terms and connector approach, you may have to take into consideration the order of priority. So, for example, phrases or words in quotes tend to be processed first, followed by or connectors all the way down, lastly to and not. Sometimes, depending on how you craft your terms and connector search, it could impact your results list based on the order in which those terms and connectors are processed. And so to demonstrate that, I have a scenario here where under our fictitious scenario, at 10 p.m., a client was pulled over for driving under the influence. According to the police report, the vehicle drifted over the center lane. And when the officer pulled the person out, they failed a sobriety test and blew over the legal limit on the breathalyzer. And so the clients dispute the account, and they say that they only had 1 beer for work. However, the dash cam footage is really poor, and the lane markings on the road were faded, and so there's no witness to corroborate. And so we're going to do a little bit of research around that scenario. So we'll take a look and see what that looks like. Swap over here to Lexis. Let's see here. So, I talked a little bit about crafting a terms and connector search versus a natural language search. Real quickly over here under advanced search, if you're curious about, some of those terms and connectors, by clicking on the advanced search, here over to the right, I can see sort of a summary of some of those terms and connectors. And I can simply click on this link to view all terms and connectors. But over here, under search everything, under field-based searching, this will help us actually craft a search prompt, including a terms and connector prompt. So for example, let's say over here, I'm going to select the type of content I want to search. And let's search, we'll do a search in cases here. And so now our form here changes, and the different fields correspond to a different segment of a typical case document. I'm going to scroll down here a little bit. Segment examples, I'm going to click on that. Depending on the type of content that you select, there'll be sort of this little example prompt here where you can kind of see in a typical case document, it contains these different segments. So in a typical case document, if I'm looking for a party name, in the party name field over here, I can just select a party name and Lexis is going to search that field. Or if I wanted to search, core terms or, within the head note section, these different fields in the form correspond to different segments of a typical case document in our example. And so as I type, I'm just typing in a random name. You notice as I type in the form here my search prompt, Lexis is going to help me craft that terms and connector search. So it's going to target the name field of a case document. It's going to look for State v. Jones in that name field. Maybe core terms, I'm going to set DUI, DWI, or let's say or DWI. Again, here it's going to all the terms that I put in the field, it'll just add them together and help craft a prompt. Maybe I want to edit my prompt instead of an and, maybe I want it or. So I can just, again, it can help me craft a particular search prompt. Delete that. So maybe down here in the terms, let's say for all the terms, let's say I'm looking for, we'll go any terms, let's see, DUI. DUI, we'll add that. Let's say DWI. Driving under the influence. So as I add terms, it's going to, under any of these terms, it's going to add ors in between the terms that I enter. Exact phrases, I don't like, maybe under the influence, I want to make sure that's an exact phrase. We'll add that. Now it's, there's a quotation mark because I want to make sure I'm getting the exact phrase if I want to exclude terms. Really just, again, the main thing is that within, form-based searching, it can help me craft a terms and connector search. And again, I can also target different segments of a particular document. But I have a search prompt here that I'm going to use. Okay. So we're going to do this search here. Reasonable suspicion within 75 words of traffic stop, within 75 words of DUI or DWI or driving under the influence. So we're gonna use this search prompt here to examine a few advanced features. When I enter in a search in my search bar, I can target again a specific type of content. So if I want to start my search in cases, I can start in cases, or if I want to look into some secondary materials to sort of expand my research, I can do that as well. And even some court filings, some briefs, pleadings, and motions. Likewise, I can apply a jurisdiction filter. Maybe, I just want cases out of California and the Ninth Circuit. I can make that selection. I can apply as many jurisdictions as I like in my pre-search filter. But for this example, I'm not going to apply any jurisdictional filters. We'll just do a search. Okay. So here's our results page. You notice we have, several color-coded terms, and as I look through my results page, I can see, I can quickly identify certain facts or certain keywords in my document based on those color-coded terms. So, if traffic stop was a really important fact, I can kind of navigate around my document. Here's where traffic stop appears a lot in my document. I can kind of navigate around my document, read a snippet of that document without having to leave my results list. So this really helps speed up that process. But what I really want to show you is that, when you're doing a terms and connector search, sometimes you might get unexpected results. Particularly, being in the law library, you might have access to different platforms, right? So you may have access to Westlaw, you may have access, you have access to Lexis. Sometimes different platforms interpret searches, terms and connector searches in different ways. And so, there's a tool over here that can really help make sure that in the case of Lexis, it is processing your terms in the way that you anticipate it to process. And this is a little search term map. It's a little network icon up here, and I'm going to click on it. And here I'm going to minimize my screen a little bit so we can see this better. Maybe a little bit too much. Here, I get this visual representation of how my terms and connectors sort of work together to ultimately deliver the results, the 1,052 cases that I ended up with. So this is a great tool when you're doing a Boolean search or a terms and connector search. And, you may get some unexpected results, or you just want to make sure that when you do a search prompt that is being processed the way that you anticipate it being processed. And again, I can see here I got 1,052 cases. And so the combination of all those terms and connectors led to 1,052 cases. This is interactive. If I want to see, for example, the 10,000 cases that include both or let's say within 5, let's say driving within 5 of under the influence or while intoxicated. If I want to see those cases, I can click on this little tab here. And then there was those over 10,000 cases that include, driving within 5 words of under the influence or while intoxicated. Okay. So terms of connectors, again, that's one way of one research or one approach to researching in Lexis. Another approach is the natural language approach. And again, natural language is really beneficial in situations where you're not quite sure what you're looking for. But very similar to Google, you want to search Lexis, be it going to secondary materials or things like that. It's a great way that you can launch your research. So the prompt I'm going to ask, go back up here to go 9%. The search I'm going to ask is, can police pull driver over for suspicion of DUI after briefly crossing center lane? So we're going to do a search. And what I want to show you is Lexis answers. When you do a natural language search, right, you may receive an answer card. And what Lexis Answers does is an attempt, it uses a bit of extractive AI to surface cases that answer that particular question. So provided that these cases meet a certain relevancy threshold, you may receive this answer card. I'm going to change the jurisdiction here. We'll go to California, and we only have 7 cases in California. Let me add the Ninth Circuit here just in case. I don't know if that'd be enough for an answer card. So we did get an answer card. So it's sensitive to the jurisdiction. So let's say I just need, a citable authority to a California case that answers my prompt. This is a bit of AI that's recommending some cases that do just that. So officers cannot pull over a driver for swerving unless it's both pronounced and continuous over substantial distance. I can see that comes from this Alvarez case. It was decided in the district court, the Eastern District Court. It was decided in 2016, and here's the reporter number. And I can expand this out here and see additional cases, again, California cases, because I selected that as my jurisdiction. Again, I can just real quickly get to citable authority that answers a particular legal question. Otherwise, down here at the bottom, here's that traditional list of cases, based on my search prompt that I can apply a variety of filters to sort of comb through. In addition to cases, there may be, again, some secondary materials. There may be some treatises or guides or excuse me, some statutes or codes or some practical guidance related to that search, just provided that it all meets sort of this relevancy threshold. Similar to Lexis Answers, we have recommended questions. Again, to sort of help with your research, when you do a natural language search, Lexis may recommend some questions to sort of help guide your search. So for example, is speeding and driving the wrong way on a one-way enough to prove reckless driving? And if I click on that question, I can see, a case, again, out of California, since that's our jurisdiction. I can see a case that answers that particular question. And if I like that search prompt a bit better, then, I can click on this link and Lexis will rerun a search and I'll get, all of my cases based on that search prompt. Okay. Okay, so a lot of times when we're doing research, it tends to start with a single case, or, again, maybe from our results list, we identify a case, or from Lexis Answers, we identify a case that we want to use for research. And there's a way that you can expand your research from that single case. And one way, it includes utilizing the head notes. So head notes they're brief summaries of the points of law that are extracted from the case, and usually accompanied by relevant facts bearing on that particular point of law. And the number of head notes varies from case to case, but nonetheless, head notes are one of the most important editorial enhancements to cases and statutes, because, first of all, they allow the reader to quickly grasp the relevant legal issues discussed within the opinion, leading to quicker assessments of case relevancy and as to whether or not, that case merits a deeper analysis. Second, head notes help the reader to quickly navigate to the issues described in that paragraph. So it just, again, improves that analysis efficiency. And finally, head notes allows researchers to identify from a broad technical or topical point of view relevant resources that address similar legal concepts and principles. So before we jump into head notes on Lexis, it's worth noting on some platforms, the head notes are editorized, representing the editor's interpretation of the court opinion. In Lexis, we don't editorize our head notes. Our attorney editors intentionally use the court's own language to ensure that the head notes accurately reflects the court's positions and conclusions. And, with that said, there are pluses and minuses to both approaches. On the plus side, editorized head notes can add more insightful information that may allow for better classification when looking for similar resources. But on the negative side, attempts to interpret what a court has said can and sometimes does lead to misinterpretations or important information being omitted. So real quickly, we'll navigate back into Lexis. Let me see here. I have a I'm going to pull up a case here so we can view some head notes on any search. Go into a case. Okay, so we're in this People v. Wells case. If I come down here to the head notes section, here's our head notes. Again, I can review the head notes and I can get an idea of some of the major issues that a particular head note deals with. Again, I can use it for navigation. So investigative stops, if I'm curious about this case for that particular issue, that's a head note 2. I'll click on head note 2. And this is where, that head note or that issue was addressed, or where that head note comes from. Click on that to navigate back to the head note section. The more like this feature. So again, if I'm looking at, warrantless searches and investigative stops, more like this, by clicking on this link, Lexis will run a search and it'll find other cases that share the similar issues within this head note. And it's even recommending here some secondary sources that deal with investigative stops and warrantless searches. Just above the head note, we have topics. Those that may be familiar with Westlaw. Westlaw has the key number systems where, the key number in Westlaw, different topics sort of have this key number. It's a way of categorizing different legal topics. So you in Westlaw, you select a key number and you get all the different documents that are sort of categorized or share that same category of that particular topic. Our example of our version of that is Lexis Topics. So let's say you're doing research on stop and frisk. We're using that as a topic. I can click on Get Documents, and it's going to get all the documents we have that are relevant to stop and frisk. So you're going to see law review articles, cases, secondary materials, things like that. So, that's just one way that you find a good case that deals with different issues that you're interested in. You can leverage that case to find additional content. Next, another way that you can sort of leverage that case to find additional content is through Shepard's. Over here to the right of the case, we have our Shepard's panel. And this is just sort of a preview of Shepard's, or their citing decisions. With the click of a button, if I want to know why this case got this caution symbol, I can click on the button and it's going to list the top cases that had the most impact on generating this caution analysis. And throughout Lexis, if you have a question about what a particular symbol means, if you hover your mouse over that symbol, you'll get the little pop-up. So for example, the orange triangle means caution, possible negative treatment. And again, these are some of the top cases that have interpreted that have caused this negative treatment. So I can read a snippet of that case and see how the court interpreted a specific provision within our case and why that caution symbol was generated. Again, if I hover my mouse over the symbol, I'll get the little pop-up saying caution, possible negative treatment is indicated. And again, just sort of a summary of a breakdown of the different ways courts have treated this particular People v. Wells case. But when it comes to Shepardizing my case, if I want to Shepardize my case, I can click on the symbol, or over here to the right, the Shepardized document, I can click on the Shepardized document. And effectively, I just clicked on the document. Our Shepard's report is taking us to the next tab over here. Our Shepard's report is made up of these 4 tabs. So we have the citing decisions. These are in this example, 318 cases that cited to this People v. Wells case. We have the history tab where we can see how our case worked its way through litigation. Other citing sources, these are, law review articles, treatises, and things like that have cited to our case. And table of authorities, all the cases that our People v. Wells case is cited to. So real quickly, Shepard's, it goes without saying that Shepard's is the premier citator on the market. Not only will you find more cases that have been analyzed through Shepard's compared to other competitors, only Shepard's offers a full spectrum of analysis, particularly the blue and green positive and neutral treatment signals. And this small detail really yields tremendous results. So, for example, if you have a good case with Shepard's and its positive analysis, it makes finding supporting cases to bolster your case that much easier. Or better still, it may be possible to find supporting cases that have better facts. And as I'll show you in a few minutes, it can help you find splits of authority and provide, more insight in a case trend in treatment. So in the end, even if Westlaw is your preference and you prefer key cite, no one's perfect. Perhaps you have well, obviously with you at the library you have access to both platforms. It still may be a good idea to run your case through Shepard's, even if you've done your research through Westlaw. So back to our case. Again, here's our list of 300 something odd cases, 318 cases as cited to People v. Wells case. And here's that analysis. I can filter those 300 cases based on analysis. So, positive analysis, I have 5 cases here that have followed People v. Wells case for a particular issue. I can filter by court. I can filter by publication status, discussion, amount of discussion. I can find the 11 cases that sort of analyze People v. Wells. They went into a bit more discussion in their opinion compared to the 217 cases or opinions where there's just a cite to People v. Wells. So I can filter by analysis. And I can also filter by head notes, right? So head note 2, this warrantless search, investigative stop, 182 cases cited to People v. Wells for that particular issue. And so I can filter based on a particular head note, and as well as adjust my timeline. And that'll filter through these 318 cases. The 318 cases are also represented in this citing decision analysis. Here, this is a graphical breakdown by court, how my case has been treated across different jurisdictions. So obviously here's California with the bulk of the cases. If I want to see this one cautionary case in California, I can click on this bar here and it'll apply the California and caution filter. And then here's that one case out of California that we have this caution analysis for People v. Wells, and I can read a snippet of it there. I'm going to clear that filter. But this is helpful because visually I can see, how my case has been treated across different jurisdictions. And this is really helpful, particularly if I'm dealing with like federal law. This really helps to quickly identify splits of authority within different jurisdictions. In addition to that, if I select date, here I can see, visually how my case has been treated over time. Is it being more favorably discussed? I see back here in 2007, there was, at least it rose to the point of a caution analysis. But, as of late, it's just been cited to, I'm not seeing a lot of negative treatment or even cautionary treatment. So again, I can see how my case is time. So here's the second part of our Shepard report. We have the history tab. Again, this is how our case sort of worked its way through litigation. Here's a list of all those subsequent cases. So from the time it was filed in trial court to the time that it was it's worked its way through litigation. I can go into the different opinions from different points within that the court the case's timeline. Here's other citing sources. Again, these are, and I can apply a few filters. I can apply, there may be a few law review articles that discuss our case, some other court filings, some other briefs and motions, very similar, that deal with similar issues that are referenced in our case. and our graphic here is, again, if I want to see the court filings, I can click on that little purple bar and it'll apply the court filings filter. And now I can see all the different briefs and motions that cite it to our People v. Wells case, and maybe use those briefs as sort of a go-by if I need to draft a brief. And then the final part of our Shepard's report is the table of authorities. When I'm Shepardizing a case, not only do I want to check the cases that in the future that cited to the Wells case and make sure that I'm still citing good law depending on what I'm citing on that case for. I also want to check the cases that People v. Wells is relying on and make sure that's good law as well. So here's my table of authorities here, all the cases that are cited in the People v. Wells case. And, let's say that, we'll come back here, Terry v. Ohio. Let's say I'm citing the People v. Wells and People v. Wells is relying on Terry v. Ohio. I want to make sure that this caution analysis for Terry v. Ohio isn't a caution analysis that People v. Wells is relying on. So I'm going to go through my table of authorities as well and make sure that those cases that Wells is relying on is good law as well. So that's our table of authorities, and these 4 tabs make up our Shepard's report. All right, so that's my overview of Lexis in terms of different approaches to research, some different strategies you can take to leverage a case and find additional content, and including using a tool like Shepard's to Shepardize your case and find relevant content. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. Yes, so there were a couple of questions. I think this was back under practical law, looking at the forms.
Yes.
The question is, why is elder abuse not listed? And then along with family law and corporate.
Could you repeat the question again?
Why is elder abuse not listed along with family law and corporate?
Why is it not listed in that particular slide or so these are really broad topics. Even if you see something that's not listed in here, you can do a search, and not to say that it'll be in here, but you can do a search for example, elder law, and I can do a search, and there may be some practical guidance material related specifically to that elder law. But these are just really, general practice areas. So, there may, you may not see explicitly that particular practice area, but that doesn't mean that we don't have content related to that specific practice area.
Thank you. The next question, I can get this one. If you have a membership with the San Diego Law Library, are you able to use Lexis plus AI? So you won't need a membership to come in to the library to use Lexis Plus. We do not have access to Lexis Plus AI, just Lexis Plus, but it is free for the public to come in and use.
Yeah. And everything I showed you is what's available on the patron terminal. That was Lexis Plus. I didn't show you any features that were specific to Lexis Plus AI.
Thank you. The next one, I can answer this one. Can you access the library's Lexis Access remotely? No, unfortunately, you're not able to access it remotely. It is only here at the downtown library. And we have a comment. Thank you. Very helpful. Any other questions? No. I see somebody raised your hand. So we're not able to unmute you. So if you did raise your hand, please write it in the Q&A. Next question. Is there a way to watch this entire session? Yes, so this is being recorded and we will upload it to YouTube for viewing at a later time. So it should be up within next week. Any other questions? No? Okay. Well, thank you so very much, Jeffrey. This was an amazing class. You shared some wonderful Lexis Plus research tools that I'm going to use, and I'm going to share with my colleagues as well. And thank you to all of the participants today who attended today's class. And we will send out the presentation slides shortly. So thank you so much and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you all.
Bye.